Good evening, good folks, and welcome to the City of Muskegon City Commission work session for this Monday, June 12th, 2023. May we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Ramsey,
Here.
Commissioner Hood,
Here.
Commissioner St. Clair,
Here.
Mayor Johnson,
Here.
Commissioner Emery,
Here.
Commissioner Gorman.
Here.
Oh, and Vice Mayor is absent.
Thank you. Before we get on with our business, we got 3 items on our agenda just for folks in the audience as well as those at home. Note with regard to public comment, we do have public comment reserved at the end of the meeting for our work sessions. It's a little different than our general session, so you will have an opportunity to phone in your comments or show up in person and give public comment at the end of our meetings and have up to 3 minutes to provide those remarks. All right, first up, we have the third quarter of the 2022 to 2023 budget reforecast. Welcome, Finance Director Kenneth Krantz.
Good evening, everyone. How you doing? So it's the third quarter, and I just wanted to go over some of the highlights of the third quarter. For the general fund, building permits, if we go around town, you see a lot of building going on, and we had to increase our revenues from $810,000 that we originally budgeted to $1.4 million. So that's a great thing. So St. Bill's been doing a great job. But with that increase, we have to pay them a percentage of that. So we did increase their contractual expenses also. That's another good thing. But income tax numbers, our revenue numbers are really strong. I think we may hit $11 million, but I'm keeping it conservative because we still have another month and a half to go. So we may make an adjustment in the fourth quarter. With the income tax, our penalty and interest collections went from 230 to 290. That's because they're doing more compliance this year. They're getting caught up on compliance, so that's a good thing. Last year we had an unrealized loss of $900,000 from our investment income. It was a bad year, like right around the end of the fiscal year. The market tanked, so we had some unrealized loss, and we budgeted $450,000 because we didn't know how the market was going to react this year. Right now, we're at $287,000 unrealized loss, but I think by the end of the year it should be zero, or we should have a positive in interest. Other things, we have several funds that are going to require some changes or requests from funds from the general fund. The one good thing from the public improvement fund, we originally requested $50,000 to be requested from the general fund to the public improvement fund. The public improvement is doing really well. We're selling a lot of houses, so we no longer need that transfer from the general fund. Also, local streets do not need $235,000 from the general fund. Dan has found that we're going to request a transfer from the major streets to the local streets to cover some of those expenses. The arena, on the other hand, is going to need an additional $600,000 from the general fund, and that's due to some one-time costs and some unexpected expenditures. Specifically, we had our auditors last year. We had to put a refrigeration system into the arena. And the auditors moved it from last fiscal year to this fiscal year because the project was not complete until fiscal year. And then also we had to, Carlisle's went over their build-out costs by $19,000. That we're going to recoup the cost, but we still have to put that on our books right away. That's why we need additional $600,000 from the general fund.
On that note, when you say we're going to recoup that, is that in terms of we're going to get a lump sum repayment for that overage, or that's going to be factored into increased rent going forward, similar to what we had done with?
Yeah, we're going to take that cost off of their rent. I mean, so it's going to factor into their rent that they're paying us back over time.
Is that? Oh man.
Yeah, go ahead.
Is that related to that $200,000 adjustment we did earlier
Yes.
in the fiscal year?
Yes.
So we had been forecasted to forgive them 600 something, and now it's down to the 400. So that.
So we're going to, so what we're doing, they pretty much they pay for the payout, and so since they went over, we're going to recoup our money faster. That's the best way to say it. The way we're doing it. Let me see, one other thing. throughout, if you see, if I submitted all the worksheets with the guys, you guys, and all the things in yellow are changes, good or bad, but we had a lot of them. You had a chance to look at those. But overall, with 75% through the year, it's like we're on pace to have a balanced budget, or we may have a little surplus this year. But it's so hard to tell because we still have to accrue back to 630, and that goes out 60 to 90 days. So it's kind of hard to tell exactly where we're going to end the fiscal year at. But right now, it looks like we're going to end on a positive note. And then again, I just wanted to go over Arena Fund that the arena is actually doing really good with our revenues. All our revenue funds are up, our collections are up, but we still just had some one-time costs and things that we normally wouldn't have to have in place this time. But if we didn't have those, I think we would have had a nice positive year, and we would require less spending from the general fund. And Jake at the arena is doing a great job. So next year we're expecting to not need that much money from the general fund to maintain the arena. The public improvement fund is doing great. We're doing a lot of those houses that the infill housing. We're selling a lot of those houses. We sold over right now close to $2.7 million in those public improvement. So we originally budgeted $480,000 in sales, but with the infill housing so far this year, we're expected to end the year with $2.7 million in house sales. So that's a great thing. So we're doing a good job throughout the city selling houses that we're building with ARPA funds and through the infill. And once again, I wanted to go over the street funds. We have extra money in the street funds for the major streets. So we, instead of using money from the general fund, we're going to request money from the major streets to help support the local streets. Those are my highlights. I don't know if you have any other questions regarding any of the funds for the third quarter reforecast.
Commissioners? Commissioner Emery.
I do. Just for those of us who know and those of us who don't know, can you explain realized loss compared to unrealized?
Unrealized loss right now is like it's there. If we took the money out at that date, it would have been a realized loss. So it's still there. With the unrealized loss, if we leave the money in there, it could grow back. If you take the money out that day, it's realized. So if we took that money out on 6/30, we would have lost $900,000. But we left it in there and it's growing back. And so hopefully we'll get that money back and start growing. So it's just like the market was really low, and we have to take, when we do for accounting reasons, we have to look at what the market was as of 6/30. And so at that time, the market was really low, but now it's going back up. So if we would have took that money out on 6/30, we would have lost almost $1 million. It's
So
unrealized.
Realizing it is putting it in your pocket versus not putting it in your pocket.
Yes.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Yeah, and just on that note, so I gotta find it, because I just wanted folks to also understand that at the same time that those we saw those unrealized losses, given that how our cash balance was allocated, at the same time, because of the rising interest rate environment, we did see an increase in income generated, and so the interest income that is generated has actually been reforecast higher, an increase from $325,000 to $480,000. So that's how much interest income we're generating off of our cash reserves at the same time. So it's nice to see that additional income being generated.
Yes.
Even if on paper the valuation of the underlying assets have
Even with our
declined.
banking fees, in the past they have these calculations that determine how much we have to pay. So right now, with the rates being so well, we're actually earning money on our banking fees and stuff like that. So it's nice to see that too.
Mm-hmm. All right, commissioners, any other questions with regard to the third quarter reforecast? All right, so we this will be on our agenda tomorrow for adoption of the third quarter reforecast. We should expect a fourth quarter reforecast as well before year end.
Yeah, we're going to do something similar, or we're going to I don't know. We'll talk to Jonathan. I'll let Jonathan say something.
Yeah, so at the second meeting in June, we're gonna have, we're gonna do it as budget amendments rather than a reforecast. It's basically the same thing, but it'll make it more precise on exactly what we're adjusting.
Yeah.
So
Less
it'll-
work for us, just
Yeah,
data
like-
for us to review.
Yes, but it'll be very clear. Here's the departments that are being adjusted, and then we'll have a little bit of explanation as to why. We talked about that in our senior staff meeting today. So serves as the same function at the end of the day.
Yeah.
So
We don't have to look at the entirety of the budget all over again, though, to make that reforecast.
yep.
Okay. Okay. So with regard to the arena fund, you indicated that one of the changes is that things that have been the last fiscal year had to be moved to this fiscal year. So how is that necessitating a higher transfer? I'm just curious because if that was in the last fiscal year and we already did that, I think it was $825,000 last year transfer.
Would have been worse. It would have been a larger transfer if we. So instead of doing a larger transfer
Okay.
last year, we
the
had to do
year
it
end.
this year.
Okay, I'm sorry to introduce, but sounds like so the year end transfer that we did last fiscal year was already reflective of that cost being transferred to the new fiscal year, and that's why we had a lesser transfer. Okay, gotcha. And necessitating a higher transfer now. But you're telling us today that your expectation in the next fiscal year and going forward is that we're not going to need to be seeing these $700,000, $800,000, $900,000 transfers annually from our general fund to our arena fund.
More like 350, 400.
Okay. I know we start out at that 350. That's our hope every year. Is like we're only going to need to do a 350 transfer, and even that was our intention is that we're going to be able to lower that over time.
And we're growing revenues. It's just one of those. The building is so old, and we get those one-time large expenditures that we just can't support without. We don't have enough revenue to support the
Yeah.
expenditures.
Yeah, and they're critical capital improvements that you can't continue ignoring either or putting off. So, okay, thank you. Any final thoughts or questions with regard to the third quarter reforecast? This is on our consent agenda for tomorrow. Commissioners, if you have any questions or comments, I would encourage you to pose them now or share them now. All right, Commissioner Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Director Grant, I just want to say thank you for this new improved layout, City Manager as well. This was a lot easier to read, and I know that's kind of a running joke, but it is a real opportunity, and you guys did a great job, so thank you so much.
Thank you. Next budget, transmittal of the 2023 to 2024 proposed budget.
Yes. You got the package in front of you today. I don't know how we want to go about it. Last week or 2 weeks ago we did the city manager did the presentation, and today he added the budget message. I don't know if you guys had time to read it, but I could go over some of the highlights, or the city manager could go over some of the highlights if he wishes, and we can go from there.
Yeah, I was going to go over some of the highlights, and then Director Grant or any of the other senior staff members who are here should be able to answer questions that come up. Just a quick note: this is proposed. We put the approved budget header on here. Obviously, you guys haven't approved it yet, but very optimistic. So. So as Director Grant said, we already went over kind of a high-level budget in a PowerPoint presentation, and this breaks it down a little bit more into verbiage and with some charts. These numbers are pretty much the same. There's a little bit of tweaking from what was seen last week, but the percentages and things of that nature don't really change. I do want to look at page 3 of the transmittal letter, which has table 1, general fund revenues and the category breakdowns. I don't know what page that is of the PDF. I'm sorry. It's the there it is right there. So if you can scroll down that page a little bit, and you can. So these are our projected revenues in the general fund for this coming year. Property taxes are looking for about a 7% increase. Income taxes about a little more than 4.5%. And actually that might get adjusted up a little bit more given what Director Grant just talked about with the current forecast for income tax, but 11,250 is where we're thinking that will come in. One thing I do want to point out, and that we did talk about a little bit during the budget PowerPoint presentation. Sorry, that was a Canva presentation, as Deborah will point out to me. The transfers in, we're projecting that at $430,000. That's a significant decrease from last year. This is the area where we were transferring in ARPA dollars to help with general fund activities. That ceases this year, which is why that line decreased so substantially. And then the unspent revenues or fund reserves, however you want to say it, both are accurate terms. That 990 coming in is something that we didn't have last year, but as is pointed out later in the budget transmittal, their capital projects, there was one-time capital projects across several departments that equal about $500,000. Then when you take our other capital projects, things like purchasing vehicles outside of the fleet, doing desks and equipment and things like that, one-time capital purchases are greater than that 990. So that 990 is not supporting operational expenses. Next page just has the pie chart breakdown as it relates to all the different expense areas. Something that's kind of nice when you look at this, we're not overly dependent on one revenue source. It's not like in some municipalities you might have half of your revenue coming from the state or from property taxes, and we're pretty well spread out. So that is a good thing. On table 2, which is on page 5 of the transmittal letter, which is the next page of the PDF, these are the expense categories. As I noted during our budget presentation, these expense categories are not necessarily specific categories within BS&A. These are buckets that staff put different expenses into to get a good snapshot of where our dollars are being spent between police and fire, parks and recreation, sanitation, administration. Administration is basically anything that doesn't fall into one of those other categories. We could parse that one out more, but then the pie pieces start getting pretty small. There's that one-time capital. That 500 is called out because those are projects that touch multiple departments. And then looking at $1.43 million in transfers to other funds, which include the arena, the marina, the LDFA, and a couple other ones as well. The arena and marina. So the arena we're projecting $400,000. The marina $600,000. City engineering department $230,000. That one's just an operational expense. I'm not too concerned about that. That's staff that we have there. And then as we noted prior in the prior meeting, we're not projecting a need to move any funds to the farmers market this year. So that is great. Very, very excited to hear that. I also want to point out that for this coming fiscal year, we're looking at decreasing our general fund transfers to other funds by about 30%. So that's a positive sign as well. Let's see here. Some of our other budget highlights. DDA dollars are ticking up slightly, which is good. We're projecting about $400,000 in revenue within the DDA, and then we're expecting additional activity in the DDA next year with 880 First Street and Lakeview Lofts, hopefully moving forward in the next fiscal year. Let's see. I do want to take a minute to talk about the water and sewer funds. So I don't know if Director Vanderhyde, if you want to be able to be ready to answer questions, if I cannot adequately explain. So I did break out 2 tables for the water and sewer funds. Those are on page 8 of the transmittal letter, which is probably page 13 of the. Yep, there you go. But as was pointed out in our audit late in 2022, the water fund was ending the year in the red. That is projected to increase this fiscal year. So we're looking at ending the current fiscal year at the end of the month about $2.25 million in the hole. These are pooled accounts, so the bills are still getting paid, things of that nature, but it's a hole that we need to fill in the accounting. So as we talked about, we're in an effort to be more transparent about how the fees are structured and things of that nature. We're looking at instituting a debt service fee for both water and sewer. The water side, it'll be approximately $6 per month per account, and that will raise funds to help us close that hole in our water fund. The good news is that by instituting that fee, we wouldn't be raising the actual rate, and as debt's paid down, those fees would be adjusted accordingly every year based on new debt or debt being paid off, and based on the previous year's debt payments. So that way it's a very transparent, this is how we're coming up with this number, and this is what it'll be. And so it just makes it easier to lower costs for folks as those debts are paid off. And then as we go into ending of next fiscal year, the water fund is still projected to be in a slight hole, but not nearly as much as we were. In fact, it will almost be eliminated, and will be about $180,000 in the red. In the PDF version of this that we'll send to you guys, I do link directly to the audit. And on page 43 of the audits, where it talks about the where we sit in that fund. And going,
Mr. Manager, sorry. Commissioner Imes, you had a question?
I do. Jonathan, so this sounds great for the debt service fee, and I know that we're doing it so that we don't have to raise water fees. But we keep talking about as the debt goes down that we'll be able to lessen the debt service fee from $6 and some change per household.
Yes.
What is the likelihood of us being able to get rid of that altogether, and what is the plan to do so? And I'm not asking because I need an answer.
Right.
I'm asking so that we can share with our neighbors that if we are constantly accruing excess debt that we don't have the money to pay for, and we're looking at this, I don't want to call it a Band-Aid because that sounds like I'm being, facetious or dismissive of the effort, and I'm not, because I appreciate that we're doing it to not raise water rates. But how do we eliminate the entire thing altogether and get back to zero so that we know that moving forward, we'll be bringing in enough to pay what we have going out? Does that make sense what I'm saying out loud, though, or is it just in my head?
No, it makes sense. Let me take a crack at it first, Director Vanderheid, and then you can correct me where I misstep. So I think the question of whether or not it will be completely eliminated, that's a question that as we come to you with projects will be part of that conversation. What we're trying to do here is to show what the cost is to take on these projects to update our water system for the folks who live and work in this community. And a lot of this is related to the lead water service line replacement that the state's mandating. Given the age of our system, will we ever get to a point where we're not doing repairs and taking on debt? Will we ever to the point where we're not taking on repairs? Probably not. Will we get to a point where we don't have to take on debt? That is a question that could be answered by how large of a fund balance we want to build up in these accounts to be able to do what's called pay-go. So you pay for the repairs as you go as opposed to financing for them. And then you could start to eliminate that debt service. There's some different philosophical conversations that we could have related to that, but that would be one way to do that. But there's also some philosophical discussions on rates, on whether or not, so the rate should be connected to what it actually costs to treat and deliver the water, and then the debt service is what it actually costs to do the repairs and upgrades to the system, and kind of have those as two separate things.
So before anybody else talks, I think that all of that makes perfect sense, but I'm only one person, right? And so I just want to know, Director, City Manager, Mr. Mayor, because numbers is not my thing, how we're able to show our neighbors that moving forward, that while the debt service fee we know is for upgrades to the system, is there, and I don't mean like some crazy number like the mayor and I had to fight years ago when they wanted to go up 27% or something like that, right? Or whatever it was ridiculous. How do we do this in a way that is that makes sense and is manageable for everyone, so that if we're raising water rates because water costs more, then that's okay, as long as these things are accountable, so that our neighbors know what they're paying into and what they're getting out of it, so that they know that they're getting the water that they pay for, and that they're getting the upgrades to the system. And so if there's a way to make that make more sense for people, so that we don't look like we're just tapping on extra fees, and if we do that, they know what it's for, and how it's used, it might be a little more digestible to everyone. Not that you're not doing that now. This is not an accusation, but I understand the way that the debt service fee works and why, but I want to know that everybody understands that. And if there's a way to, once we get rid of what's current, which is not a thing, you just said to me, how we make it more manageable for each household that it may not be manageable for.
Yes.
Save the world, Dan.
I mean, so philosophically, we are unlikely ever to get to a point where we no longer need more revenue for the water system. Whether that revenue comes in the form of a debt service fee or a commodity rate, the actual water that we sell, whether it goes on either side of those columns, is a broader discussion that we could have. As the manager said, is it better to pay cash for things? Is it better to pay cheap credit prices for them? That's probably not my wheelhouse, so I won't step into that. However, I will say that we're almost certainly never going to not need more money. That convoluted sentence makes sense. So, for example, we have a large $880,000 or so debt payment that we currently pay for improvements that were done to the water treatment plant. That bond falls off or is completed, paid off in 2027. So when that project comes off, when we no longer owe that debt, this debt service fee will go down by a substantial amount in that given year. However, more immediately, because that project was started in, I think, 1996 or something like that. Maybe it was 2006. But anyway, as we sign up for projects today, we are signing up our residents, our citizens, for a 20-year, in the case of a 20-year bond. That debt service fee, as we add to it, that's a 20-year commitment each time we sign up for one of those. So, as staff, we're recommending we do that only in the context of these fantastic principal forgiveness and good rates that were being given by the state. If we were to go out and bond for it on the open market, I'm not sure that I would be as excited to recommend these projects to you, or at least to go into debt for them, right? As we go through each project, you all will have the opportunity to look at and comment on the project, see the impact it will have to the residents in the system, and we'll make a decision about whether that project is worth the cost, so to speak. In terms of how we can make it more understandable for the citizens, that's probably a communications, manager's office kind of discussion. But I mean, some of the things that jump to mind are like a map, perhaps, that shows projects that the debt service fee is helping to pay for. Tools like that will make it easier for folks to understand what that fee is going to. Yeah.
I have one final follow-up, Mr. Mayor, if it's okay. And I don't know who can answer this, but right now, are we as City of Muskegon residents paying an actual rate for the water that we're being delivered? Is it under or over? And if so, why? So how far off are we from actually paying the rate that we should be paying per household for the water that's delivered, and then how much of that is being moved over to the debt service fee? Does, like,
Well,
if it costs 50 cents to deliver a gallon of water, but we're only charging 45 cents, and we're taking the other 5 cents in the debt service fee, why not just put it back into the water thing and then figure out what the reality of the debt service fee is going to be, so that there is no convolution of the two columns that you so eloquently spoke of? Because to me, that's where the confusion comes in, is that we have this seesaw that happens with our water bill every single month that our neighbors are confused and frankly frustrated by it, and that's no one's fault. That's the reality of the system. But how do we make it so that we understand exactly what that is? And if one of them is not fully realized as it should be, why don't we do our best to level set that and then go from there? Again, questions, not accusations.
Absolutely.
I'll chime in here in that I think that's the direction we are going with this change. We had that. We talked about philosophical discussions. We
Right.
had that.
None of this is philosophical because I pay my water bill every
Right,
month.
it's practical. It's philosophical discussion with real world implications. And we had that philosophical discussion or conversation as a commission a few months ago at a work session where it was presented. Here's how other municipalities are charging, what their rates are, how they're handling, their capital improvements and needs. Do you go to a debt service model? Do you do an entire just a rate model? In which case, we're going to have to raise rates considerably in order
Right,
to
and
generate,
we don't want to do that.
in order to generate enough cash flow to then service the debt going forward, or pay as you go.
Right.
Either way, at that time, the commission decided, in the interest of transparency, exactly what you're trying
Yep.
to say, clarity.
Yeah.
So it's clear to our end users, we were going to go to this debt service fee model in addition to the water rate, and the water rate expectation is that is what it's going to be in order to provide that service itself. Treating the water, distributing the water, getting it to the end user, and that instead we're going to have a set aside fee that's going to be connected to the amount of debt that we need to take out. Unfortunately, we have this program through the state that gives us really reasonable rates, and then a significant portion of it ends up being forgiven at the same time. And so the net of that loan that we have to pay back, we're going to connect to that debt service fee going forward. So we can say, look, this is what it costs in order to maintain our system, upgrade it.
2 columns.
Yes. And
So then I guess that's my final question, Mr. Mayor, is our current water rate fully realized at what it should be? Or is there some sort of, with the budget, I always say, well, just put it there. And you're like, no, that's not how we do it. We have to put it over here and then take it back over here. So are we doing that with our water bill, or am I paying my water fee in its most realized state every month?
Well, going forward, the expectation is the water rate will be unrelated to debt servicing. Correct.
Thank you. That's
yes.
amazing to me. That's what I want to hear, and I hope our neighbors at home heard it too. That debt service fee then reflects only the upgrades and work that needs to be done, and our water fee is our actual water fee. Thank you.
Did you have something to?
Well, I will qualify that.
Caveat.
I will qualify that to say that any improvements we pay cash for come from arguably the water commodity rate. Only improvements that are being
Right.
paid on a bond
Absolutely.
will be in the bond or the debt
Absolutely.
service fee. Yes.
There may be some smaller projects that we don't need to borrow.
But,
So
but
for-
they're not. But the water fee is not going for these larger sweeping
Correct.
projects within neighborhoods where we're replacing lead lines.
Correct.
That's a separate debt service fee. So as long as we can keep those 2 columns completely separate, so that our neighbors, myself, Michael Ramsey, understands that, and that my water fee is my water fee, so that when we're done, I can see that I'm not. The reason that our debt service fee went down from $7 to $4 is because we finished an entire neighborhood. And
Paid
now
off
the
the-
next project is smaller or whatever. I mean, it can be anything. I just want to make sure that our neighbors know that we're paying what we're paying for water, and it's only for the water. And to maintain the system that is there and how we get it. And the other stuff comes from the other column. Thank you.
No, thank you for helping everyone at home and in our community to understand what we're doing here.
Because it's just always
yeah.
been, like, ever since I've sat on this bench, it's been so convoluted, and the way that we do it has been so, like, scary. And thankfully, I have you and Teresa to explain it to me in the early days. But now we're going back to it. And so, moving forward, we might as well level set so everybody has a severe understanding of how the situation works.
There's another philosophical question
Oh.
that came to mind, though, when I heard our city manager reference that the debt service fee is going to be on a per account basis. And so what I'm wondering then is, if you've got an irrigation line, and you've got sewer and water for your house, but you've got an irrigation line as well, are we charging this fee for each the irrigation line and their main line?
So I'll give you two qualifiers on that statement. Directly to your question, no. We are not charging it an additional fee on the irrigation account. How we also are, now granted, you all have to approve this fee in its final form at the next meeting, but as we're planning to bring it at that meeting, the fee will be on a meter equivalency basis, which basically means a residential account pays a factor of 1, right?
Mm-hmm.
A industrial and commercial user pays a multiplier of that residential rate. So, and that is based on their meter size. So if a, large industry has a 4-inch meter instead of what most of us have, which is probably a 5/8 inch or 3/4 inch meter, that industry will pay a factor larger than a residential account.
Okay.
So that to better reflect the system expenses relative to moving the water to that individual, right?
Yeah, it's proportional, equitable. I like both of your answers.
Right.
So great answers. I think that it's fair not to charge an extra one for irrigation. And I think taking that proportional, equitable approach is the right way to go. So thank you. And when you say the next meeting, that's going to be our second general session. So that'd be June 27th. That those fees will likely be on our agenda for adoption. Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Manager.
Yes. Thank you, sir. But you might not want to go in here for a minute. Yeah. So, similar to the water fund, the sewer fund, back to Commissioner Ramsey's questions about making sure that we're being consistent and keeping things in the right column, it was determined we should also have a debt service fee in the sewer fund to show how that debt's being paid. This one's a much lower one, but this way it's like, well, why would we do it here and not here?
Right. So as long
Yeah.
as it's the same process, method, and program,
Exactly.
I completely support that because it's not something that we have to memorize. It's completely different.
Correct. And it is the same methodology to come up to that that fee. For that one, it's about $2.40 on that one. So the net position of the sewer fund is much better than it was a number of years ago, as those who've been here for a while will recall. Right now, we're looking to end fiscal 23 with about $2.9 million sitting in that account. And we're projected to add another 2.4 next year to get us up to about 5.3. That is getting up to about the point where the American Water Works Association recommendation, so that's kind of the governing entity, what their recommended fund balance is, which is approximately 6 months of operating revenue, to have that cash on hand in case there's an emergency. So this way, if something happens, we've got a little bit of flexibility there. And then as those debts are paid off on the sewer account, that debt service would be adjusted accordingly. So I'm not going to say anything on the rates right now, but we can talk about those at a different, probably following fiscal year, see where those things line up. But we want to make sure that going forward, you're maintaining that fund balance at about that 6 month operating rate, and seeing how you can adjust rates based on that. So that, any questions on the sewers?
I have one final thing, and it's actually not for us, but it's for anyone watching from home and in the audience, which is just staff. Please do remember that for the remainder of this calendar year, MDHHS, the Michigan Department of Health and Human Services, is allowing a ton of money to be used for water and sewage service. So if you are having a problem paying your water and sewage bill, please reach out to our local office and they can connect you with some resources.
Thank you.
Moving into the equipment fund, which I think you're all aware is a self-sustaining fund. We're looking to expend about $1.3 million in capital purchases in there. Most of that is related to public works and fleet vehicle purchases. I don't know if there's anything special next year or if it's just standard run-of-the-mill.
The only large purchase in that group is our combination sewer truck, or the Vector truck, the big truck with a vacuum tank on its back. Those are we actually own 2 of them right now, and they both are at the end of their life, so we're gonna get rid of both and get one good one. So
Then moving into public improvement, we're looking at accommodating several projects in that fund while still maintaining a cash reserve there for future purchases in future fiscal years. But City Hall boiler replacement here, obviously at City Hall, there's $150,000 in the for the capital projects for park planning. That's actually a flow through from the convention center. Fire station number 5, which is the Marquette station. I always joke with the chief, the numbering system doesn't make sense to me, but so I always put the street name next to it. That roof needs replaced. DMDC parking lot purchase. This is the lot behind the chamber and 18th Amendment. Nelson House move. Pier Marquette South restroom building. Infill land purchase, so that's $500,000 that the city has available to it to purchase parcels that are identified for our infill housing program to keep that going. And then $50,000 for the ADA compliance program, which is a consent order that we're under with the federal government. Last time I had that listed as, I think, DOJ expense, and there were some questions on what that was. So I made it simpler. The biggest change in the budget for this fiscal year is the Parks and Recreation Department. So the next section is based on that. Obviously, we've been talking through parks a lot lately, so you guys are fairly well aware of where we stand. We've hired the director. The commission has created the Parks and Recs Commission, which we'll start to appoint members to in the new fiscal year. We'll be migrating some staff over to Parks and Recreation that are involved with events, and then backfilling what's created there in the clerk's office. We're going to be updating the Parks and Recs plan with a focus on parks improvement specifically, and taking a DEI approach to that, where we're really looking at where those investments need to happen. And then we're going to update the parks following that master plan update, and then we're going to be implementing recreational activities in fiscal year 23-24, including mobile recreation services, youth sports, swimming lessons, senior programming, among others. And I dropped a parentheses there, I'm sorry. One of the questions we had was how does this budget look together? So there are 4 main general fund there's 5 main general fund departments that flow into Parks and Recreation. Recreation and recreation programming, I believe, are for whatever we've got 2, Department 751 and 755 as you're going through the book. Together, that's a total of $340,000 ish. Previous fiscal year, those were goose eggs. Interestingly, that 340 is about what our balance of parking revenue is after we pay for the parking program. So you can definitely point to that number and show where that's flowing in from. McGrath Park is part of Parks. This is actually seeing a slight reduction, but this has to do with a one-time project that was allocated for this fiscal year at McGrath. And I believe for next year we're looking at the band shell.
There's an effort to make some minor improvements to the band shell, regardless of what happens, and then larger improvements will certainly be part of what we discuss as a part of that master planning effort.
Park maintenance. So this is one that's been primarily what has been sustaining parks the past number of years. Looking at just under a 10% increase in that line. Forestry, that falls under parks, so that's why that line's there. And obviously we've got a lot of trees in the parks, and so foresters spend time there. And then overall, the total Parks and Rec budget's increasing by about 21.38%. And so this is directly from direction from the commission on where you wanted to see some of our priorities spent this year. Outside of the general fund, federal grants, we're anticipating $1.5 million from the ARPA dollars. And then that that public improvement dollar, which is also on that previous page, is accounted for here as well. So the total investment we're looking in parks for this year is $4.7 million. But I wanted you guys to be able to have this quick reference, so you could go in and see this in one spot, as opposed to if you go to this page and this page and this page. Here it is in one area. This is the allocations. This isn't necessarily the revenues, because revenues are general fund revenues, so they're kind of going to that bigger bucket. Parks does have some minor revenues from shelter rentals, and we're anticipating that some of our programming might have nominal registration fees associated with it, but nothing overly substantial. Certainly not self-sustaining. So this is the that budget. So we are excited about this budget that we're putting forward. We were able to do the things that the leadership of the city amongst staff thought were important. They presented options to Director Grant and myself that they had already weeded down to what was really either necessitated, something that needed to be done, or through the direction of the commission on goals and objectives, such as the Parks Department, that we were able to accommodate this. Some challenges that we're going to have going forward, and I do want to make sure I point this out: recruitment and retention of our public safety personnel. This is going to be something that Director Kozel and I will be talking to you guys about over the next couple of months. Director Kozel has some good ideas on working on recruitment for public safety that we'll be talking about in the new fiscal year. But as has been the case for a while, we're competing with smaller and smaller pool of candidates with other municipalities. So we need to make sure that we're competitive in that. But as folks continue to retire, as folks move on to other positions, that will be something that we're going to need to be aware of, and how we tackle that going forward. And then obviously we've had a number of lawsuits this year that have come to an end, but the costs associated with that will kind of have some ripple effects going forward. But we do expect finances to remain healthy, and as you look at our 5-year projection, we continue to build that differential between our income and our expenses. So it'll continue to go. Looks like it should be going well. I do just want to point out some aesthetic things in the budget, so that to kind of understand the method behind our madness on this. So one of the comments that we'd received was the numbers were small. So we did make it smaller, which added some pages, but we did what's called the green bar budget out of the BSNA. It's a software program that we use. We looked at the activity, or so the amended budget, so that you have the reference of where we stood for these calculations, our activities through March 31st, and then what our recommended budget is going forward. The 2021-22 activity, so obviously that was the previous fiscal year, prior to the 22-23, so you can kind of get a reference on where things are moving over time. There used to be some additional columns in there. Because of size and reference, we eliminated that just to allow you to kind of have a quick reference of the past, a closed out year, the current year, and then kind of where we're recommending going. That should again give you a couple data points to see how things move along. We kept the headers at the beginning of each page, so you don't have to flip back and forth to figure out what column you're looking at. And then the green bar is just what's added in by the computer program. Going forward, we are going to be looking at consolidating some of our account numbers, because we do have a number of account numbers that are kind of duplicative, and make things harder to understand. That won't be for this fiscal year, but it will be for next. Another thing to let the commission know, so on the back side of the budget, there, from the division and department head standpoint, things looked a lot different. They were actually inputting the budget directly into our software called BSNA with footnotes, so specific projects and attachments and things of that nature are in there. Those will be in there. I don't necessarily want to say forever, but they'll be in there for reference for years back. So as we go forward with future budgets, we'll be able to go back and compare what was requested, what was approved, kind of eliminate that question of, wait, was that last fiscal year or 2 fiscal years ago? So it'll be in there for them, and also help us with running some different types of reports. So those are the budget highlights that we have right now. Back towards the end of the book on page 110, there is just the activities as part of the resolution for the various accounts, just like listed out like you would see in previous fiscal years. So I am opening it up for questions.
Commission? Questions?
Oh, I did have one.
Oh.
And
Think
then,
about your questions.
yeah.
One more thing from
Yeah,
you.
sorry. And then our intent is, since there was miscommunication on my part, I apologize, on the budget book. Since we're getting this to you today, we're going to put this up for final passage on the 27th or 27th.
Mm-hmm.
So that way it can sit out there for a little while, both with you and the public. Like I said, this is largely the same information that we went over in our first budget presentation, but.
Okay. So for tomorrow's meeting, we're not going to be formally adopting transmittal of this budget.
But
Are we
will
going to
have-
proceed with the public hearing
Yeah.
tomorrow?
Yeah.
Okay. So tomorrow, when we have a public hearing, we'll just need a motion to close the public hearing, not to also transmit the budget. That'll be.
I mean, unless you want to pass it.
27th. No, let's give more time for our community to digest the budget. Engage us with any of their questions or concerns. Commissioners, do you have questions about what's been presented tonight, or what the data that you've received before tonight? I know some of this we are just receiving, but a lot of the data we had received previously. Any questions right now? We will have that public hearing tomorrow, so you are welcome to ask questions as part of that public hearing tomorrow evening as well. And then it will be on our June 27th meeting. And of course, if you have any final questions before we adopt it, you'll have another opportunity to do so or share your thoughts.
Say one more thing. The
Yes.
capital improvement, which is, we cleaned that up to make it look a lot cleaner and easier to look at. That's back a couple pages, but you can see that at the end. So the capital improvement sheets in the past were kind of confusing, so we cleaned them up, and we're making them unified with the department heads are using on a daily basis.
Yeah, no, that's nice. I see this in the booklet, that spreadsheet that identifies all the different funding sources for each of the capital projects. So that is nice to have that detail and in a more easily understandable format as well. Thank you. In terms of because this is new that we got today, the personnel complement. Are there any major changes there that you want to call to our attention in terms of the personnel complement?
I think we're projected to add a position in finance, a position in the clerk's office, and I think in
Development,
Jake's office.
Development services.
And then DPW had how many?
Effectively, too.
Yeah.
2 additional FTEs.
Well, we're transferring people.
Oh,
yeah.
2 transfers. Yeah. So there's
Okay.
2 coming from the clerk's office going into the, okay. Going to DPW for, gotcha. And then we're getting elections coordinator position in the clerk's
In the
office.
clerk's office.
Correct.
Yes.
Correct. Okay. Nice. Has that job been posted? Were we looking to get that started for the at the beginning of the new fiscal year, or-
Once it gets approved, we'll go
Oh,
with
post
get
it.
the.
Okay. I know we got elections this year. I'm sure the clerk's office would like to get that person sooner than later. Speaking of the clerk's office, as it was mentioned by our city manager earlier, that this year we're not needing to do any general, or at least we're not expecting to do any general fund transfers into the city clerk's office for the next new fiscal year. And it looks like they were wrapping up this fiscal year as well without any additional transfers.
For the farmer's market?
To the farmer's market? Yeah. Sorry, did I?
To the clerk's office.
Did I say the clerk's
Yeah,
office? I
yeah.
meant the farmer's market. The clerk's office, which is presently overseeing the farmer's market. So I just want to say kudos on the great work of you and your team on getting the farmer's market to be self-sustainable. And I realize a key part of that is the tremendous work that you and the Taste of Muskegon Committee and all of the people throughout our organization who volunteer for that is a key part of ensuring the fiscal sustainability of the farmers market. And if you just want to speak to, this past weekend's event, Madam Clerk, and the success, hitting new records and
So Taste of Muskegon actually went very, very well this past weekend, and very excited to say that we broken a record and sold 30,000 more tickets than we've ever sold before. So we are very pleased, and so were our vendors, and just really happy at what we were able to do. The farmers market. Very excited. We're getting super, super, super close. So it's very tight. June 30th is like the same time that all of the vendors their fees are due. So I always like to put that little caveat in there that we're like really close. So as long as everybody pays, but I am really excited because it is the closest. From having to ask for $50,000 and $60,000 in the past, that we're getting there. We're getting there. So yeah, I'm excited.
nice work all around. And
Yeah,
that
thank
is
you.
really exhilarating to hear.
It's definitely
that-
a team effort. I want to say that, and it was a lot of our employees. A big team effort with DPW and City Hall and just everybody coming together. I do want to point that out. So thank you.
Yeah. It was definitely organizational wide effort
Yes.
for Taste of Muskegon. So
Yes.
thank you to all of our departments and all of our staff for stepping up and volunteering and contributing to make that event so successful for our community, for the vendors, and help to ensure the fiscal sustainability of our farmers market. And it was just wonderful to hear that we sold 30,000 more tickets this year than last year, because last year blew us away.
Yes, it did.
Like we're just taken aback
Yes.
how much sales had increased last year,
Yes.
and to see that continue this year is just phenomenal. So many thanks to you, Madam Clerk, your team in the clerk's office, and to everyone and all of the departments across our city and all the staff who stepped up to volunteer for that event. So thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioners, last chance for any additional questions about the proposed budget for this coming fiscal year. Of course, shouldn't say last chance. Last chance this evening before we move on to the next item on the agenda. All right. Next item, Shoreline Drive traffic pilot. Study of Phase 2, Public Works. Welcome back, Director Vanderhyde.
Good evening again. As you may recall from our March work session, we had a consultant here from Progressive AE. Chris Zull was his name, and he presented the results from the first phase of our Shoreline Drive pilot study. If you'll recall, that was when we, last October, we reduced Shoreline Drive by one lane from approximately Western to Terrace, and we performed needed maintenance on the street, including some concrete patching, some asphalt work, and things of that nature. We took advantage of that time to gather data and to put it into a report format. The report showed, although most of the metrics that I think we all were interested in were positive, including reduced speeds on Shoreline Drive, very little impact to the time travel through the corridor on the order of seconds. It did show a small increase on Muskegon and Webster, although there was no appreciable speed increase on Muskegon and Webster. So that, coupled with the fact that our Terrace Street road construction was going on at the same time and may have been impacting the data gathered on Muskegon and Webster, the study and our consultant recommended that we proceed with a second phase of the pilot, which would be to essentially repeat it from a traffic perspective this summer during the busier events and tourism season, reducing it one lane in each direction again. But doing so over a longer period of time, and again, during that time when we might expect to see more traffic, and also at the same time as from an annual perspective when we gathered data last year. Existing conditions data in July of 2022, and so by implementing the pilot through the summer at this time of year, ideally right around the same time in mid-July, we'll have similar data that we can compare and have a better understanding of maybe the more direct impact. So at that work session then, we received what we took to be relatively positive support for that second phase. However, that came with some requests, I guess, to go back and look at the cost and complexity of the implementation of that second phase. We had budgeted $100,000 overall for this effort. That first phase, if you set aside the needed maintenance and we assign that to the street fund, that the cost of the traffic control and other things in that first phase was about $25,000. The original design of the Shoreline Drive traffic pilot envisioned a much more complex and lengthy pilot. This is going back a little bit. We early on in the process decided that we were going to do a phased approach, and that's how we ended up with the maintenance-based first phase, with an attempt to just make sure that this wasn't going to be an unmitigated disaster, and it wasn't. So this phase two, as the consultant had presented it, would be going back to that original version of the pilot. That would be something that would help folks envision what that space might look like while they're out there driving through it. We received that feedback from the commission that perhaps we shouldn't invest as much time and treasure into that effort as was suggested, given that there was mixed feeling about it in the community, and so we went back and we got some feedback from our consultants and our contractors, and I've got essentially a smorgasbord of options to present to you. Excuse me. And with your feedback, we will get a pilot out there that matches budget intended and supported for the project. So I'm going to kind of build from simple to complex here, and then we can go back and kind of discuss where that lands us. So kind of the minimum cost, same as what we spent essentially in phase one, is the amount of money necessary to set up the traffic control. So as you enter the Shoreline Drive area from one side or the other, we need those message boards, the arrow boards, the cones, the signs, the paint changes, and things like that. That's similar to what it was last year, going to be about $25,000 again. We then reached out to Barry's Landscaping and asked what they thought it would be to bring out a reasonable amount of landscaping to set throughout that corridor that they would prepare, plant, and maintain throughout the trial. They gave us a price of $14,000. We tried to confirm some things with them, and they hadn't gotten back to us as of this afternoon. So we're recommending actually another $25,000 for that effort, just to make sure, that we can maintain it properly, water it, etc. Some of the other components of the trial that I think would be minimal cost and perhaps maximum impact are having some street art done by the Art Initiative. Thank you very much. That cost would be minimal, assuming we're able to secure some volunteers from the art community. $1,000 or $2 for the materials is all. Then we get into some of the larger efforts. So the original design of the pilot, excuse me just a minute. The original design of the pilot had shown a bike lane in the, we'll call southbound side of the pilot. That bike lane was not necessarily intended to replace the trail that we have, but simply, again, to draw folks' imagination out that there could be other uses for that space. Between the paint and the original feather flags that were designed to help delineate that area, We estimate that that would be about another $37,000. And then we had another $10,000 in miscellaneous costs, which was intended to serve for some additional imagination stations, so to speak, which were like, this is not a bus stop, but it could be, right? So we put an unused bus shelter out on the road. We encourage folks to envision that, this could be a multi-transit corridor. Some of the other ideas that were suggested that we'd have to work with the community on are working with Amazon Apartments to create some sort of extended patio. Not that we would encourage their residents to step into the street in any way, but simply to make their back patio area more pleasant. So again, there's a range of options, and I think I'll recycle the summary and build from the ground up, and then look kind of for some discussion from you all about what you think is appropriate. So the base cost to operate the second pilot from an implementing the traffic controls perspective is $25,000. We wanted to put some plants out on the street. That would be a total investment, including the traffic and so forth, of $50,000. We could add street art, assuming volunteer labor for essentially the same cost. We could add the bike lane on the southbound side for a total of about $67,000. We were to add other miscellaneous items in the working with the community and so forth. That would be another 10, so a total of $75,000. I hesitate on that last item, the other miscellaneous imagination stations, only in the sense that they might delay our ability to get the pilot out timely. So I would say that if we wanted to engage in those efforts, we would do so while the pilot was out on the street, and that way we could ensure that we met the schedule we wanted to, and those efforts would be added as they became fully fleshed out. So again, base cost of $25,000 with plantings, $50,000, and my apologies, I goofed that up. So base cost of $25,000 with plantings, $50,000, with the bike lane, $85,000, and then with those other miscellaneous efforts, $95,000, for a total of $100,000. So, in summary, $25,000 at the minimum, $100,000 to put out the pilot as it was originally envisioned and as it was budgeted. And I know, as I said, that was kind of a lot of numbers, but basically we're just looking for some guidance on how much of that $100,000 budget, acknowledging that we've already spent $25,000 of it on phase one, you'd like to support for the second phase of the pilot. We envision it would go from July through October, and would hit most of the tourism and event season.
Okay. And how much is... No, never mind. Commissioner's questions. I was going to get back to the budget next year, but that's, of course, going to change based on tonight's conversation. So, Commissioner Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Director Vanderhyde. So we've got $75K to play with because we budgeted an initial 100, and because the study is so extended, I think that this is a great opportunity to give people the chance to see something that is sort of realized and what it can look like. So if you're saying that $67,000 is going to make it look the best that $67,000 can, adds a bike lane, and doesn't impede the start date of the project, I would absolutely support that. I think that you guys are doing a great job, and to really offer our neighbors a chance to see what it could look like, because as in many situations, when we don't get to see something physically, we tend to make the worst out of it in our heads, right? And so anything that we can provide as physical proof of what it could be will only help the cause if that's what it is, if the data says so. So I know that you said that you were not in favor of the 75K option because of the start date. Is that the only reason? Or is that, which one would you suggest, Dan?
And again, my apologies. I misspoke the first time through. So with with the fully fledged out bike lane, it would be $85,000. The additional 10,000 is what I'm questioning because I believe it might impact the timeline. The only way to make that work, I see, is to work with those organizations as we move forward. And if we're able to secure interest item in a timely fashion, roll it out as quickly as we can. If we're not able to make that work within the time frame, then those items, would not make it out.
So, final follow up. It's 10,000 over budget, and the bike lane would put us 10,000 over budget, and we may not get it started on time.
The bike lane would put us 10,000 over budget, and those items would allow us to get started on time. It would be the additional $10,000 worth of imagination stations that might
put us 20,000
might get us
over.
past. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Commissioner. So then that would make us $20,000 over budget.
Yes, the 10,000 for the additional imagination stations would put us $20,000 over budget.
I could be swayed to support a $10,000 bike lane. I don't know if I could be swayed to support a $10,000 in imagination. And I think that our biking neighbors, who we partner with quite regularly on these sort of efforts, would also appreciate that. So I could be swayed to vote for that.
Commissioner Gorman, did I hear you?
So this phase that we're talking about, we're no longer talking about a spring phase break and then a late summer fall phase.
So
Wasn't that a thing at one point? Oh, sorry.
It was the first one that didn't work, I think. Oh, sorry, not my turn.
we initially were talking about last year potentially a spring and later fall phase, but we missed the window to do that.
Okay.
So we did kind of the opposite. We did the fall phase as the smaller phase, and now we're going to do proposing to do this summer the more complex and longer phase.
And where would the bike lane go relative to the existing shoreline bike trail that is loved and used?
It would, to be clear, it's temporary, as are all of these items.
Yeah.
But it would be in the lane closest to the bike trail.
Okay. So I'm not really excited about that because there's a bike lane there. And this is just me. And I've said this before, and it was well received from the biking group that's come here. I am just really interested in comparable data to the last study we did. So if we have opportunity for some visual amenities to help people understand, fine, but that's just not a priority to me personally. That's it. Yep.
Thank you, Commissioner Gorman. Yeah, Commissioner St. Clair.
Thanks. I would like to see the visual amenities because I would like our community to see the visual amenities. I think that people are having a very difficult time understanding what this could look like and how this could feel and how it could change the feel of the downtown. I don't feel like I need to die on a hill one way or another over a $10,000 bike lane, given the proximity to the bike path. And I do understand that bike lanes and bike paths are not the same thing, so please don't come at me, bike community. But that's one thing that, I'm comfortable either way on that. But I do really like the idea of building it out in a way that people can see what we're imagining. I don't need the whole imagination station thing. I am wondering, maybe this is completely unrelated, but what happens to the props at the end of the study? Do we own the landscaping? Can we reuse that? Can we auction it? Is it a rental? What are we buying with this?
The price that we got from Barry's was to rent 40 of their pots that they would then fill with plants, take care of this summer, and then take away at the end.
Okay. So No auction opportunities there.
Good
All
question.
right. That's all.
Thank you, Commissioner St. Clair. Commissioners, any other questions or thoughts? Commissioner Emery.
Explain the imagination stations. What would that look like?
Sure. So, as they were envisioned in the original pilot, there was the Amazon back patio, which was essentially just a screen set out in the roadway of a larger number of plants, I suppose you'd say, to make that courtyard area that faces Shoreline Drive a more pleasant place to be. There was the fake bus stop out on the Convention Center Plaza. There was the art. The street art was actually one of the stations envisioned in that original pilot document down at, I believe, First Street. Essentially, the most of the intersection that wasn't being used for active traffic would be painted in a street chalk paint kind of a thing. And then there was some talk of working with the farmers market to have an additional space around the corner, northbound. All of these spaces, I should say, would occur on the northbound side of Shoreline. So in the curb lane closest to downtown. There was talk of having a station next to the farmers market that would potentially be parking for the farmers market, since parking is such a desired thing there through the summer and fall in particular. There was a little squeamishness on our part, of having parking on Shoreline Drive. So we'd have to investigate that, but it could be done. We're reducing the speed to 35, so I think it's possible.
Thank you.
Follow up, Commissioner Emery?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Commissioner Ramsey.
Mr. Mayor.
Before I go to you, just
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Commissioner Hood, do you have anything to ask or add right now?
Nothing really to add or ask. I would just like to see a visual. Guess I'm not all that excited about making it a priority, but I would like to see a visual. That's it.
Thank you, Commissioner Hood. Commissioner Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So can we wheel and deal it? Is there some a la carte options here, Dan, where we can talk about, because Commissioner Gorman was very wise about, there is a bike lane 5 feet from a bike lane, Michael. So if we were to give up the bike lane, collect the data that we're still talking about collecting, maybe instead of having Barry's take, and I'm not telling anyone how to do their job, instead of maybe having Barry's take care of it for the entire summer, how about we just rent the plants and throw them in a trough? Does that then give us an opportunity to look at some of these imagination stations to put them in place? Because I feel like there's a huge value add to that as you explain what they are. In my head, it was like a children's museum thing, and now it's not. And so if you could wheel and deal and not go over budget, I would absolutely support the visual representation. And if Commissioner Hood is talking about you giving us a pictorial representation before this happens, I would also absolutely support that.
Yes, and I regret that I didn't bring the previous layout of the pilot with me this evening, so my apologies. Yes, there's certainly a way to do that. It would be $60,000 to put out the traffic control, put out the landscaping, and work with those organizations to try to develop those imagination stations, so to speak, without the bike lane.
I would absolutely support that.
There's something to add?
Yeah, I was just
Mr. Manager?
going to kind of try to sum up what I'm hearing just to see if we're on the same page. So there's still the desire to see it go forward. If we can do it within the original budget and some type of visualization, so folks can visualize with their hence visualization. So kind of what we're hearing. I just want to make sure my notes are reflecting what. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the visuals are important for our community to understand the possibilities for the reconfiguration of Shoreline Drive. I am a little leery of getting rid of the what I prefer to call the cycling commuter lane, because there's a difference from a recreational bike trail versus what is being considered as part of the reconfiguration of Shoreline Drive as putting in a commuter lane that would take traffic that may be presently using the recreational trail off of it and putting it onto a commuter lane. So given that if our goal with the reconfiguration of Shoreline Drive is to add a commuter lane, then I think it's important to have that included. If it's not, if we as a commission said, no, we don't want a commuter lane, period, then we don't need to have it try to be reflected in any pilot. I think visuals are important. I think it's good to collect more data. I'll just say that I nearly voted no on the previous study when this came to us. I came into that meeting inclined to not move forward with the study because of concern about it being divisive, about it being a distraction from so much of other things that we're working on, and also the fact that we had a Muskegon Lake plan that had reflected and envisioned doing, quote, intersection repairs along Shoreline Drive to improve that pedestrian accessibility, improve safety, the interconnectivity between our core downtown and our waterfront. So I was more inclined to let's see that play out before moving forward with this study or moving this project forward. But what had pushed me over the fence of moving forward with the study was the fact that we couldn't look at reconfiguring Moses Jones Parkway. The state had informed us that they're not going to allow us to look at reconfiguring Moses Jones Parkway, which I think is a incredibly egregious division and barrier between our lived community and our waterfront and our core downtown, separating our Angel and Jackson Hole neighborhoods from that core downtown and the waterfront. And so that's what put me over the edge and said, okay, I will continue to support this study. I think that our goals and what we want to achieve with the study and what we want to achieve with the reconfiguration Shoreline Drive, I fully support. The benefits we're trying to unlock, the value we're trying to create, fully support that. It just was a little leery of getting rid of lanes and going down to one way each way at this point, but I do support collecting more data to help inform our decision making as we go forward. But especially for me, from my perspective, especially to move us closer to addressing Moses Jones Parkway. And so I don't feel, I guess long story short, I don't feel super strongly about the elements of this. I do think visuals are important. If we're seriously considering reducing Shoreline Drive to one lane each way, I think our community needs to understand very clearly why. I think visuals are important to show that, including of a commuter lane. So those are my thoughts. Commissioner Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for the commuter lane aspect of the bike lane verbiage. I am not opposed to putting a commuter lane on Shoreline Drive, for a bicycle commuter lane on Shoreline Drive, if there is a clear tie to the Imagine Muskegon and to the Moses Jones Parkway and to what's already existing. Like if we knew that, even if it was over budget, I might be able to be swayed for, you know what I mean? Like that makes sense to me, but I would really need to have a fierce understanding of what that commuter lane looks like as a long plan, as that.
Yeah, where does that fit into our
Right, fully. What's
regional
the fully
infrastructure?
realized outcome of a commuter lane? Because otherwise, But if there's something bigger than that, just right there, sure. So I don't know if that's hard work.
Well, I'd encourage us not to get caught up in some of the same things that the community's doing, right? Mm-hmm. So really what we're trying to do with this is essentially just create a proof of concept. We're trying to say that, okay, the computer said it would work, we tried it in the real world, it did work. Therefore, let's go have a huge conversation with our community about what Shoreline 2.0 looks like, and hopefully including Moses Jones. So what we're presenting tonight and what may even be out in Shoreline Drive is not intended to drive any specific narrative about what that corridor looks like. Mm-hmm. It's only just to open imaginations about what it might look like, so that when we go to have that conversation, folks are perhaps more open-minded about it than they are today.
Good context.
Support.
Thank you. Commissioner St. Clair.
Thanks for that. I think that the one thing that probably ought not to be negotiable is that we do something other than just close the lanes, because people already know what that looks like, and we know what that feels like, and it's not going to be helpful to the community in any way. So I think that we need to invest some level of imagination, beautification in this. And again, I'm not gonna fight anyone on how we do it, as long as we have something that the community can look at and say, oh, that's what they were talking about. Okay, I can see that. So I will go along with the will of the bench, as long as we're doing something.
I did have a follow-up question. You mentioned the potential staging for parking. Will we see that, even if we can't physically park, will we be seeing flex space where there could be parking? Because, anywhere along there, like flex space, this could be overflow parking during events, or this is regular parking for the farmer's market, or things like that. So
Parkway.
it can be seen even if we're not actually physically parking there.
Yeah, we could certainly try to think of ways to, call to mind parking spaces. We'd have to be a little careful not to make them so realistic as to encourage people to park there if we felt that wasn't safe. But
Park a car there already.
I'm relatively sure that we could make it safe, as long as, folks understood what the intent was. For perhaps if we didn't have the bike facility on the west side, it could be overflow parking for our events at Heritage Landing or things like that.
Yes, Commissioner St. Clair.
Could you park some fake cars there? More imagination station? With
Yeah,
cardboard cut out of a car?
We would have to find an artist or someone who was capable of creating such a thing. We do have a few sort of derelict cars that hang around in various spaces around town, so it's possible we could tow some of those out there. But again, being careful that we don't encourage folks to park it.
Right.
But yeah, I certainly think there's ways to call to mind parking similar to the other stations that we've been talking about.
Any final thoughts, questions?
Okay, I'm thinking about this more. What about if the art museum just put up a banner along their fence to hide the mess that's happening in the beautiful expansion, but it's like a transparent visual of like what it's going to look like. So to your point, instead of just having cones, could there be some kind of transparent image on it to show what we're looking for, but not the actual things? I don't know.
Like a scrim image.
Yeah, it's like you can see through it, so you
Yeah.
know you're not supposed to go. But if you're walking, because we want people to walk, you would be like, oh, that could be a pocket park or whatever.
Yeah, that is
Probably
a pretty good idea. Yeah, we could look into doing something like that on just putting up a chain link fence for the purpose of putting one of those screen banners on it to call to mind whatever it might be that we want to. Getting it printed in time might be a little challenging, but we can start to look into that.
I got some crayons.
Commissioner Amy, did I see
You
about to ask
did.
or add something?
Could you please remind our community, the long range goals of Shoreline Drive diet? What the purpose of us even looking at that is?
Sure. So broadly, we as the city don't own Shoreline Drive. However, it's an integral part of our community. When the state has an obligation to rebuild it or substantially maintain it, we as the city have an opportunity to help them determine what that next version of Shoreline Drive looks like. In order to be in the best position to do that, and for example, to be in a position to go and seek federal funding to support that effort, or to be in a position to convince MDOT, perhaps in the face of a headwind from Lansing, right? We feel it's important to be able to say, and for the community to have seen, that Shoreline Drive does function well with just a single lane in each direction. as a part of those conversations, when someone stands up and says, yeah, but what if Shoreline Drive grinds to a halt? We can say, well, no, we already did that. We proved that it won't. So that question has been answered. All we're here to do today is to figure out what this will look like next time. Answer the question?
It doesn't really.
We staff debated on this, and we've talked about putting out a specific vision of what Shoreline Drive would look like, right? With lanes in a certain configuration, and bike lanes or commuter lanes or pocket parks or things like that. But although again that would be a good imagination tool, it's not really what we think is the ultimate goal of the project, which is to find out how do people want, what should Shoreline Drive look like if it doesn't look like it does today. Rather than imagining some specific version of it, we want to encourage the community to have a conversation about it.
Okay, so is it to make it easier for our residents on, I guess it's the south or the east side of Shoreline Drive, to be able to get to the shoreline safer?
Yeah,
those kind of ideas. That's what I'm looking for.
sure. So I think we can all agree that in its current state, it's difficult for people to cross it. So if there were good reasons to cross Shoreline, and there are a few right now, making that crossing safer is definitely a worthy goal. How do we do that? We design the road to be safer for pedestrians, to reduce speeds, to shorten crossing distances, things like that. Those are only possible, or those are mostly possible, in the context of a smaller Shoreline Drive, which is why we're trying to prove that that is possible.
Thank you.
And I'll just say that I like the explorative approach, where we're trying to stimulate conversation, imagining creativity. How do we want this to work for us? And rather than the city coming with a specific vision, like, this is what we want to do, we're doing this to collect data to reinforce this is what we want to do. But instead, it's more of a open-ended exploration exercise, one that takes time and money, but is one that will help us decide how do we, as a city, want this particular piece of infrastructure to best serve our city and its residents and guests to our city at the same time. Commissioner St. Clair?
And I think it's important to remember that it's data. It's all data, and maybe at the end of this we will decide, nope, this is a terrible idea and we need to leave it exactly as it is because we ended up with a terrible nightmare, and let's not spend another dollar on this. And that's good information to have too, because then we don't jump through all the hoops and do all these things, and 10 years later have a terrible situation that we could have avoided by doing a pilot this summer. So
Yeah. Either way, the insights will be valuable to us. Yeah.
It's all data.
Any other thoughts or questions at this time, commissioners? All right. Do you have enough information to proceed?
Yes, I believe so. So we will, Dan and I will touch base, but it looks like interested to see it going forward with some type of visuals. So bike lane is TBD. Yeah, but visuals definitely. So
Yes. Yeah, because that, the commuter lane, that's really expensive to be trying to just do a
fake
paint of a
lane,
temporary
yeah.
commuter lane. And so, we can communicate that if this moved forward, an option would be a commuter lane differently. We could come up with our own visuals,
Cardboard
that you can see on screen or print out versus necessarily seeing. Although I imagine some in our biking community might would they be able to use it? Or would that just be for show? Because if it's a commuter lane for show and no one gets to use it, then I'm like, no. I would be like, no, we can depict that in other ways, and that's would save us considerable money. I mean, now if folks can use it, maybe there's some value to having it. So.
Yeah, the way we would set it up, they would be able to use it because it wouldn't necessarily connect to anything other than the Lakeshore Trail as it exists today. I'm not sure the specific value of it.
Yeah.
You would have to get off the Lakeshore Trail, get into the commuter bike lane, ride it until it ends, and then get back on the Lakeshore Bike Trail.
Yeah.
Or ride with traffic if you're comfortable.
Or
But,
10
yeah.
bucks.
Kind of a disconnected, isolated commuter lane that. Yeah. I'm gonna say forgo it.
Let's just
We
get a
can
fake bike
communicate and
and a
depict
dummy.
it in other ways, but those are my thoughts. All right. I think everyone has an opportunity to weigh in. Okay, we're good. Thank you, Director Vanderhyde. All right, this brings us to public comment. Let's see get the number scrolling across the screen, so folks get ready at home. If you do wish to give public comment, that number will be going on screen, and you can phone in. You'll have up to 3 minutes to provide your remarks. While we're giving that a few minutes, commissioners, are there anything on tomorrow's agenda that you might want to ask about right now from staff?
I've got one.
Mr. Manager.
So we had 2 items that were added. They were intended for the next one, but they got added to this one. It's property sales for 2 Duzendang homes. It's a run-of-the-mill thing that we usually do. If you don't have any objections, we'll keep those on there for tomorrow since they're already out there. So I just wanted to point that out. We had very efficient staff all around. So just wanted to point that out. So it wasn't deliberate that we put it on that late, but.
That is. Sorry, I just wanted to give people the
addresses?
sale of 301 McLaughlin Avenue
Yeah.
and the sale of 355 McLaughlin Avenue, items 7M and 7N that are on our consent agenda
Yes.
for tomorrow night's general session.
Yes.
No, those are just like the many other homes that we've constructed in partnership with West Urban Properties and Dave Dusendang. So we got two more sales. Imagine we'll see those reflected in the fourth quarter reforecast.
Yes.
That's going to be forthcoming for this fiscal year. All right. Now that the public comment phone number has been on screen for a few minutes now, checking in with their clerk. Has anyone called in?
No, they have not, Your Mayor.
All right.
Tired.
Still recuperating from a
I
very
am.
busy Taste of Muskegon weekend. All right. I'd entertain a motion to adjourn then.
Moved.
Support.
All right, we have a motion by Commissioner St. Clair, supported by Commissioner Emery to adjourn. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye. Aye. All
Aye.
opposed, same sign. The ayes have it. We are adjourned. Thank you. Take care and be well.